Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much, Jen, and thanks to this group for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you tonight. I've done this talk a few times for a variety of audiences, but never for other cancer thrivers like myself. And so I'm really just excited to share a little bit about what I've gone through over the past 6.5 years. And hopefully you guys can empathize with the journey that I've been on, being both patients and caregivers, and and hopefully we can have some great discussion. So like Jen said, I'm Leah Evert. My day job is the Senior Director of Employee Experience, Engagement, and Wellbeing at Viatris. I'm a well-being professional. I'm actually a registered dietitian by trade. I started my career as a dietitian, working in private practice, actually spent some time in oncology nutrition, and then went back to business school to learn more about corporate health and wellness, and have been working in population health for the past decade or so, where my goal is to make sure that people feel like they have the opportunity to be healthy while at work, both emotionally healthy, physically healthy, socially healthy, and all those great things. And so I work for a company called Viatris, but those of you in the Pittsburgh area probably know it as Mylan. So that's the new name, and I've been there for about 1.5 years, but I was the head of wellbeing at McCormick, the spices company, before that, and I was the director of wellbeing at Marriott International before that. So this is my third kind of large global company running wellbeing and employee experience strategy. So that's my day job. My part-time job is that I'm the co-founder of the Willow Foundation, which Jen mentioned is probably really where my passions lie. When I was first diagnosed with cancer, I was not given a lot of options. I was told that there was some good treatment, that I had some good treatments that I could try, but that they would likely fail within about a year and a half or so, and that I would eventually have to move on from therapy line to therapy line and exhaust them at some point. I remember talking to the head of oncology at Johns Hopkins, and he said, well, you're not going to die this year, but probably next year. And it was like a lightning bolt. As many of you probably know, just the shock to the system that you never expect to have. I have no family history of cancer, no genetic markers for cancer, so it was just a complete and utter shock. One thing that I found that was quite interesting is that my oncologist and oncology team didn't really have a great plan in place for me to have control over my outcome whatsoever, meaning I kind of had to put all of the faith into my oncology team's hands. And that, for a type A person like me that had been very career oriented and driven, felt like a big loss of control. And as a nutritionist, I felt like, hey, there's got to be something I can do to make an impact on my overall outcome, right? Like I need to employ some sort of strategy around nutrition or exercise, or what sort of mindset techniques can I do? Is it meditation? Is it cardiovascular exercise? Is it a low carb diet? Is it a vegetarian diet? Is it what can I do to kind of help improve my chances? And there weren't a ton of studies that really connected diet, exercise, and mindset with improved outcomes for late stage cancer patients. And so my best friend and I decided, well, let's fund these studies, because these studies don't oftentimes get funded because there's not a lot of potential for patenting, right? If you find out that turmeric helps to reduce tumor growth and mitigates tumor cell replication, turmeric is a widely available product. It can't be patented to sell as a product, and so there's just not a lot of desire to fund these kinds of things, because there's just not a lot of potential for profit. So we started funding these studies, and so the Willow Foundation has funded 6 studies that connect these lifestyle behaviors to improved outcomes. We've studied movement and exercise, cardiovascular exercise. We've studied various nutrition strategies, including a ketogenic diet, as well as a plant-based diet, and whether or not that shifts the microbiome, and that can improve efficacy of drugs. We've funded 2 studies with in conjunction with an organization called Comedy Cures that studies whether or not laughing and happiness helps improve outcomes. And so we're the ones that are trying to help support these additional non-pharmacological interventions, knowing that a whole person approach to cancer is really the right way to go about it. So that's where my passion lies. And then in addition, I think as a way to kind of process my diagnosis, I also spent some time writing, and I wrote a book called Nourishing Resilience, which was published in 2020, the Thriver's Guidebook. And in this book, I share some of the things that I've learned during our time putting funding research, Willow Foundation, around things you can do to improve your outcomes for cancer or other diagnoses. But one of the other things that I did is I started to talk to other people who I would consider thrivers like me, that had gone through some sort of traumatic event or experience, not necessarily cancer. I talked to a woman who had had a traumatic birth and had a child with special needs. I talked to a gentleman who took a dive off of a pier and broke his neck and is now tetraplegic. I talked to a woman who was, excuse me, a world-class triathlete who was hit by a distracted driver during a training run. I talked to a woman whose brother committed suicide out of the blue. And I realized that these people, despite the fact that we had incredibly different experiences with trauma, were actually looking for the same type of emotional connection with one another and had experienced a lot of the same emotions in dealing with this kind of trauma. And so I realized that this concept of resilience really transcended my diagnosis and was across a lot of different areas of trauma. And together with these people, we developed some key principles that we thought would help us thrive through the unimaginable. And so I'd like to share a little bit of that research today. First, a little bit more about my story, and then a little bit about that research, and hopefully answer some questions. And I hope you find it interesting. All right, so a little bit of a background on me. So in addition, in 2017, this was my life. I was a corporate wellness, corporate dietitian, doing a fair amount of public speaking, teaching people a lot about healthy living. I also was a captain in the United States Army Reserves, where I was a nutritionist. So I had the cool responsibility of actually providing nutrition care to both soldiers and service members, as well as community members. I was a part of an organization, a unit that actually did community-based medical care, which is really interesting. So I was living what I considered to be a full life. I actually was just in business school getting my MBA, doing a lot of things. And out of the blue, after returning from a ski trip, I found a lump on my breast. And as maybe some of you all experienced, I went to the doctor thinking, this has got to be nothing. I'm going to be the one with the cyst, and they're going to say, oh, you're silly, go home. But I remember when that radiologist used that wand and looked at me and said, well, I'm very worried and I need you to come to get a biopsy tomorrow. Cleared her schedule to do this biopsy. And then within 4 weeks found out that I had stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. So I had cancer in my breast, in my lymph nodes, in my lungs, and in my liver. In fact, my oncologist said they were too many to count, innumerable mets in my liver. So my liver was, quote, riddled with cancer. And it was just out of the blue because I felt totally fine. I had just returned from a ski trip. I had spent an entire week skiing, felt very physically fit and active. And I thought, how is this possible? But here it was. So in a month, I went from being this thriving individual to being a, like many of us, cancer fighter, lost all my hair, terminally ill, metastatic breast cancer patient. And at the time, my oncologist said, your survivability rate, average survival time, about 2.5 years, and the 10-year survivability rate for someone with metastatic breast cancer was about 4%. So since my diagnosis, I faced a lot of different treatment options. I've had 19 rounds of radiation. I've had more than 10 surgeries. I've had multiple secondary cancers and complications. I have had secondary skin cancer, which is a side effect of one of the medications I've had, which required surgery on my face. I had major surgery to reconstruct my face, 40 stitches in my face. And I've had 105 rounds of chemotherapy. And even though I've had this hardship, every time something new happened, every time I faced something different, after a period of understanding, there was a level of acceptance that I was able to get to that I don't think prior to this diagnosis I was able to ever experience. And I felt, for some reason, stronger after. I felt more confident. I felt more grateful, satisfied. I kind of gotten to a place in my illness where it brought me peace. So many of us live our lives with blinders on, with this expectation of what our life can look like. And I had now been given this gift, one that allowed me to stop living in the potential for what could happen, and instead finding peace for what I was experiencing in the now. So I started to feel very lucky that I was considered to be terminally ill. And so I was very curious about this mindset. Why was I feeling so good and so happy and so positive when I was living with this incredible amount of uncertainty? I was feeling, everyone was just saying, why are you so resilient? What is going on? And I started to look at the studies, and I started to learn a little bit more about this concept of grit and mindset and resilience, and how they really played a key role in someone's survival, or even better, they actually played a role in their ability to thrive with something so terrible as terminal illness. So I started talking to people I know who had also experienced this adversity and thrived, not in spite of it, but because of it, and really started to learn what made them different. And what I learned is that a lot of acceptance has to happen when you are faced with some level of adversity. Obviously, acceptance of the things that you can't change, acceptance of a future that you had not imagined. But there's something even more important. So I want you to think of this scenario. It's probably a very minor case of adversity, but it helps us to understand what our minds are going through when we're experiencing something bad. So what's the difference between someone who is resilient and someone who is not? So we've got Jane and Anna, our two teens, and they're in high school, and they are in a math class, and they both took their math exam and have failed their math test. So both of them receiving failing grades on their math test. They're both incredibly upset by this grade. They know that it's going to affect their future, affect their overall grade in the course, but also their overall grade in their GPA, could affect their college outcome. Their parents will be upset, both of them very distraught by this. Now, Jane works really hard, gets a tutor, and is able to turn around, and on the next test is able to get an A. However, Anna spirals instead into failure. So Anna just decides, well, I'm not good at this. I'm just not going to try anymore. They both experienced the same experience, but they have very different outcomes. And I think what we expect is that adversity leads to consequence. A leads to C. But what I have learned is that there's something in between here, and that is your belief. And so even if you have experienced something terrible, what you believe in is what actually can have an impact on your overall outcome. Jane believed that she could get better, and Anna did not. When I was told that I only had 2 years to live, that my survival chances was around 4%, I decided to disconnect myself from the numbers. I stopped looking at Google. I started to think about the things that I could control, and about the things that were making me feel my best. I believed I had the potential to live my best life in whatever number of years I had left. And I thought about the things that I had control, and I honed in specifically on those items in order to bring as much peace into my life as possible. And I realized in that moment that I was building these strong foundations and pillars of well-being that was crucial to my survival. And when I talked to these other thrivers, I realized that they were doing the same thing. They had similarly bounced back stronger than prior to their initial adversity. And they had embraced a lot of the same pillars that I had too. So let's talk about what those are. The first one is, of course, nutrition. As a nutritionist, this was one of the most important things to me that I was incredibly passionate about when I started to think about how I could control my outcome, right? I'm the only person that has control over what types of food go into my body. And so I am able to choose things that I know would nourish me, make me feel good, and support my healing. And it wasn't just nutrition to support my body, but it was also nutrition to support my immune system and my immune functioning as it related to my specific cancer. And unsurprisingly, I did not have a ton of support from my oncology and my medical team to recommend any specific nutrient strategy for when I was diagnosed, besides just eat healthy and eat fruits and vegetables, which I already knew what to do. But there was emerging evidence that there were studies that showed that nutrition therapy and various therapies was a key component for late stage cancer patients. And if you had the energy and the wherewithal and the desire to, you could employ these strategies to give yourself better chances for your outcomes. It became my mission to do just that. And that's what was the impetus for me founding the Willow Foundation. I wanted to make sure I gave other cancer patients some power back when they got diagnosed, and gave them some level of control over the things that could help them potentially outlive their diagnoses. Second one is exercise, something I know that this group takes seriously. Despite the ailment, exercise was how many of my thrivers that I talked to really took control and ownership over their bodies. The same year that I had been diagnosed, a close family friend, Nancy, who I mentioned before, was a world-class triathlete. She had been on a training bike ride, and had been hit by a distracted driver, so someone who had been looking at their phone while she was in a traffic circle. Nancy flew over 100 meters, and she was given a near zero chance of walking again. After her injury, she decided that exercise was going to be her medicine. And after spending over a month in the hospital, she was transferred back home. And she started really small. She started getting out of her bed and walking to the door. Then she started walking from the door to her end of her driveway and back. And then she started to walk at the end of the street. I mean, these are things that for a triathlete just is demoralizing, right? Like, I mean, she used to be running marathons. After a year after her accident, Nancy was back to doing triathlons. And 2 years after that, she was back to competing at the top level. This is a person that was given almost no chance to survive. And instead, she's back to where she was. She used exercise as medicine to get her to the place that she wanted to be, and has totally transformed her life. The next one is mindset. Believing that you can thrive without becoming beholden to expectations has been the reason that many of my thrivers have beaten the odds. When my oncologist told me that I was going to die from cancer, I actually allowed it to liberate me, not chain me down. It was all of a sudden I had this permission to do whatever brought me joy in the moment. If someone said, "Oh, do you want to take this vacation?" Absolutely. Yes, I will do it. No second thoughts. If it was saying, "I love you" to a friend, family member, or partner, yes, all of a sudden there's no holding back, right? No self-consciousness. I also started to have a party for every small thing, and everything was a reason to celebrate, break out the champagne. My mindset changed significantly because there was no delaying any sort of satisfaction or happiness from here on out. It was just all I wanted to do is bring joy to as many moments that I could as possible. The next one is kindness. Almost all of the thrivers that I've met have found ways to use their experience and share their experience with others, to give back, to provide hope. Just doing something and having purpose has been an incredibly important part of healing. Dallas was a vibrant 26-year-old who became a quadriplegic, actually tetraplegic, which is a little bit different, after diving in shallow water on vacation in Ocean City, Maryland. And this is a person who was an incredibly vibrant human being. His whole life was about dancing and celebrating, and all of a sudden he was in a wheelchair. And this has not stopped this man whatsoever. He has now found his purpose by gifting his time to the American Spinal Injury Association. He's had an entire wing of a rehabilitation hospital named after him. He is a complete inspiration. And when I ask him about this, a young single man, how he feels about his diagnosis, how he feels about half of his body no longer functioning, he tells me I would not have it any other way. The value and purpose that it gave me for my life has changed me forever. And despite the fact that I live with this disability, and there's this is how I will live forever. This is my mindset and my happiness, and my purpose and drive has changed forever for the better. The next one's authenticity. I think we live life oftentimes trying to create the life that we want and be the person that we want, but letting our guard down and talking openly and honestly has been cathartic for every single thriver that I talk to. I talked to Trevor, who was a hard-charging finance professional living in New York City. And at the age of 29, he had a stroke where he had to relearn how to walk, how to talk, and lost complete function of his bowels. He is now living with a colostomy bag as a young man. I think he's about 40 now. And he lost his wife, his spouse, and was fully embarrassed for, the new life that he had to live. But then he started talking more openly about it. He talked about his stroke. He talked about his struggles that he had gone through. And he started sharing specifically how this had changed his life. And it connected him with people who had similarly felt completely overwhelmed and overburdened by their illness or their experiences. The openness that he had created a completely new network for him. And just this past year, he got engaged to a new woman. So changed his whole life, being able to talk about it instead of hiding in the shadows for what he had experienced. And the last one was love. And I'm not just talking about your partner, but finding ways to be open and accepting and giving love openly and honestly from family members, from friends, from partners, even from pets can have a profound effect on your life. And this is something that I've learned that needs to be, there's no zero sum when it comes to love. You can always have and give more. And it's something that I've learned and needs to be an instrumental part of my life. It can be here, there, everywhere. And saying I love you and to the people that are important to me has been one of the most key turning moments of my life, and has allowed for incredible connection, conversation, and healing for me. And so despite the fact that maybe some of you aren't experiencing some of the same things as me, maybe you're managing some level of adversity. And maybe that's shaking you to the core. And maybe some of you are dealing with chemotherapy right now, or radiation, or surgery. And I want you to think about these 6 core principles and how you can use them to your advantage. And I want you to think about how your health, you can have control and ownership over your health, and can give yourself the best chance to get through the adversity. Here are the things that I've experienced and the emotions that have taken control over my life. And these are the things that I've employed to make me feel stronger after. The first one is acceptance. This is really tough, particularly as someone like me who is a young cancer patient. I was incredibly overwhelmed upon diagnosis. My inner flight or fight was kicking into overdrive. And in order to cope, I felt like I really needed information. So I started to do a lot of Googling. In fact, my oncologist never told me that I had stage 4 cancer. I had to Google what metastasis was and what it meant that I had cancer in my liver. And it was like, oh, this is actually stage 4. Okay. I didn't understand. I didn't know that. All she said was like, well, we wish it was stage 2, but unfortunately it's not. And I was like, okay, well, that's not great. But Google was not kind to me with the statistics, and I was not prepared, and I was not prepared to talk to anybody who had experienced something like me. And I had formed one friendship of another woman that had metastatic breast cancer, and within a year and a half, she had passed away. And it was just not the journey that I wanted to be on. And so when I did too much research, I was very unprepared to handle the information, and I needed to kind of cushion myself. And what I learned is that you do not need to solve every solution in a set period of time. And there is peace in sitting with uncertainty. And the truth is that that was a really tough thing for me to accept. And I think as a planner, and maybe some of you are also planners who like to kind of know what's next in your life, I had a real tough time sitting with the uncertainty that now was my life. And as humans, we absolutely abhor uncertainty. We go about our life with a plan in place. We're told that we get married and we have kids and we follow this path. And the truth is that all of us could drop dead tomorrow. I remember when I was first diagnosed by my doctor, I asked my doctor, am I going to die from this disease? And she said, oh, yes. And then she says, well, I guess you could be hit by a bus instead. I was like, oh, okay. That's an interesting thought. But the truth is that we don't have any certainty and we don't have any guarantee. And when I was given this diagnosis, the veil was pulled back and I was able to kind of understand, okay, we really can't have this planned out life, as anything could happen. Literally anything could happen. But we all actually can't stand the concept of uncertainty. And an interesting study showed that we would generally choose a bad outcome over an unknown but possibly good outcome. In fact, this study in the UK showed that participants experienced a greater amount of stress when they had a 50% chance of being shocked by an electric shock than when they had a 100% chance of being shocked by an electric shock. So the experience and the understanding and knowing that something's bad is going to happen allows us to prepare ourselves, but the uncertainty makes us even more uncomfortable. Intolerance for uncertainty puts us at greater risk for anxiety and even depression, but it's natural to feel overwhelmed by uncertainty. And learning to sit with that is a huge lesson. And I had to experience these various waves of uncomfortable feelings. And I eventually learned that I didn't have to sit with I didn't have to solve every single problem that came my way. I didn't have to have an exact path to success, mostly because that path just didn't exist. But I learned to accept that there were way more things that I couldn't control than I could. And I've been liberated by that. I've been liberated by having that veil pulled back. I've been liberated by being so close to end of life. And it's my type A planning, constantly solving mind has been liberated by the acceptance that I can't do. I don't know what's next, and that's okay. And that is okay. It's forever changed me. It's changed, this mindset has changed me. I'm a better family member. I'm a better partner. I'm a better colleague, a friend. I'm not immediately driving to solutions. When someone comes to me and asks me a question or tells me something or has a complaint or a concern, I'm not immediately saying, well, maybe you should try this. I'm able to just let them say those things and express their feelings and emotions. And there's nothing wrong with that. I used to be the type of person who was like, okay, let's solve this. Let's Google it. We'll come up with a solution together and let's, talk about this. No, it's okay sometimes to just sit with that emotion and accept that you sometimes don't feel your best, and that's okay. The thing about resilience that I've learned is it's not about toxic positivity. It's not about always feeling good and having no bad days. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to not feel your best. In the Army, when I was in the Army, we used the term embrace the suck, which means you have to kind of embrace the bad things that are coming your way, be prepared for them, know that they're happening, and get through them. You have to muddy your way through them. Sometimes you just have to stew through the bad in order to get through the good, get to the good. The next one is surviving. And this is learning how to manage your own capacity. Cancer patients have to do this very quickly. In an instant, our lives completely change and we have to adapt. And you all know this as well as I do. Appointments, treatments, physical changes, they come at you and there's nothing you can do about it. And we kind of have to plow our way through it and handle it all. And if you don't handle it all, sometimes it's good to just have things to do, because otherwise the stress can be overwhelming. But when life does get overwhelmed, everyone experiences some level of stress every day. And in the right amount of stress can be a good thing. And maybe some of you have experienced this where you have a great to-do list and you feel very accomplished when you cross things off that to-do list. And that's that good stress. That's the stuff that you want to feel good, to feel accomplished, to feel like you're doing things in your life. But when it overflows, that's when things can turn bad. So what I love this analogy of our stress and capacity like a bucket. So stress can turn bad when our amount of stress is greater than our capacity to cope. And if ignored, it can grow into a serious problems that can affect your physical health, your mental health, your resilience, your well-being, and your ability to fight your disease. So I'm wondering if any of you have ever gotten to the point where you feel like you suddenly have a problem with anger or suddenly are irritable out of nowhere. And that is when our bucket is filled with water and is overflowing. So think about this bucket. This bucket fills up with stress and it shows our capacity to cope. So there are daily things that fill up the bucket, whether it's deadlines, whether it's friends and family members, whether it's conflict, whether it's traffic or poor weather or other people's stress or a rude person that you interact with or a terrible phone call. Lots and lots of things can burden us. And that stress throughout the day, throughout the year, can fill up your bucket exponentially. So your bucket gets filled higher and higher and higher. And if the bucket overflows, that's when we can lose our patience. Some of us have buckets that are already pre-filled, whether that's genetics or childhood experiences or varying levels of social support, or just not being able to pour your bucket out over the years means that you have a level of stress that might be a little bit higher than others, and you don't have a way to pour that out. But those experiences that they make your bucket fill up quickly, or they can be the drive for you to get a bigger bucket. So cancer has helped me get a bigger bucket. I'm able to pour my water out of the bucket regularly using positive coping strategies that help me relieve stress by talking openly, by talking with other cancer patients, by writing, by learning, by nourishing myself and taking care of myself, by having good sleep, by prioritizing healthy eating, by having good and positive relationships, by giving and receiving kindness from others, by exercising. All of those things help me pour a little bit of my water out every day. And those are the things that help me feel my best. I just want you to think about your bucket. It's a great analogy. It's helped me understand also how other humans handle adversity too. When I was very sick, I had friends and family members that openly allowed me to pour my water into their bucket, right? I couldn't handle my stress. It had to go somewhere, and I would pour it into their bucket. They were able to take on my stress and make their buckets bigger for me to handle my stress and my trauma. But there were people in my network, people and friends and family members whose buckets were already full. And I, at first, took it really personally that I couldn't pour water into their bucket. But it's not because they didn't love me or care about me. It's because their bucket was full and they did not have the capacity to handle my adversity and stress on top of their own. And sometimes that felt so burdensome to me because I thought, I have cancer. I'm the one with the more serious concerns here. But that really wasn't the case. Everyone handles trauma differently and have different size buckets and have different levels of filling in their bucket. And instead of blaming them for not being there for me, I gave them space for when they needed it most. And like some of you, probably I lost some friends, close friends during that time, and that's okay. I don't begrudge anyone for not being there for me. Cancer is a difficult emotion. It's a difficult thing to experience, and the emotions are challenging. And if they didn't have the capacity to share my burden at that moment, that's okay. I just want to make sure that they have the capacity to empty their bucket. Giving them kindness and space, grace, means we can all pour a little bit out of our buckets. The next one is go live. This is one of the things that surprised me about life, is the complete lack of understanding that we're all dying a little bit out every day. And that's a really scary thing to say, because, we always think of ourselves as living, but every day is, a day towards the end of our life, and we're all going to die at some point. And as morbid as that sounds, embracing that philosophy has helped me make choices today that I never would have before cancer. So since I was diagnosed, I have gone helicopter skiing in Italy. I finished my MBA. I spoke at countless conferences. I worked at 3 Fortune 500 companies. I got a rescue dog. I've been to 10 new countries. I wrote a book. I threw out a first pitch at the Congressional Women's Softball game. I swam in 4 oceans. I hiked on a glacier. I bought my dream house. I ate a scorpion. I drank countless bottles of champagne. I've been on the Jumbotron at multiple sporting events and more. And these are things I don't think I ever would have done if I didn't have this diagnosis. I've been empowered to do the things that I always wanted to do, and am grateful to cancer for that liberation and empowerment that I now feel. I've embraced the silliness of life. I've released the expectations that I had for myself and that other people had for me. I've learned how to say yes more. I've learned how to say no when I want to. I live openly and honestly, find the good in everything. I've also learned to find the silver linings in the toughest of situations. So I will tell you that the scariest moments for me, or the most upsetting moments for me, was not when I found out about my potential shortened life, but it was after I had cancer for 3 years, and I started to get additional cancers. I've had 6 bouts of skin cancer that are a side effect of the medication that I take, that I'm more prone to these types of skin cancers. And the first one that I had was on my face, a very large skin cancer that overtook my nose. And it required this pretty intensive surgery that had to reconstruct my face. So they had to cut a large part of my nose out, pull my skin down over my face, and I had to have 40 stitches. And it's funny because I had already had so many other surgeries and dealt with so many other things, but this was the moment that broke me. And I remember after seeing my physician, I went to the bathroom and I just collapsed on the floor and I was crying because I thought to myself, everything else you can kind of hide. And even when you have, you lose your hair, you can wear a wig, but like this was my face, and I knew that it was going to change the way I looked forever. And I remember just collapsing and crying. And I just could not imagine that I was still having this horrible news, these terrible things happening to me. And it took me a couple of days kind of sitting with that awful feeling of like, my face is going to be totally transformed and unrecognizable. And it's not that different, but it is different. But after a couple of days, I finally was able to realize that while I was going to have this whole change in my face, the way that the procedure worked was that they pulled the skin from my forehead down over my nose. And so I actually was going to take the slacked skin that my slowly aging face had and cover my nose, meaning that I would lose all of the wrinkles that were starting to form on my forehead. So I was all of a sudden now going to have a free facelift. So that ended up being my silver lining. That was the joy that I was finding. It was the thing that kind of got me through it. I said, okay, you know what? I can handle this. Here's the benefit of this is that I will now have this nice new forehead without any wrinkles. So, finding the silver linings oftentimes is a process. You can't find it immediately, but it certainly has helped me get through all of the bad things. There's never been something bad that happens to me that I haven't eventually found something good coming out of it, whether it was me talking to or learning or experiencing and sharing with others, or being a person that someone could lean on, or sharing my story, or there's a million other silver linings for basically everything. I don't think I've experienced anything that I haven't thought, okay, well, there's some value and benefit of this experience to me or to others. And if you look for them, you can find those silver linings in just about everything. The next one was that embracing community. And this has been super important to me, is to find the group of people that make you're happy and happiest. This is my first year of us putting on my foundation's annual, we call it October Breast, which is a large gathering and celebration of life that raises money for the Willow Foundation. And every year we have nearly 200 people that join us in celebrating life and being a part of our community. And that has been crucial for me to be resilient, is to just have the understanding and the support of all of these people that make me feel good. And, the interesting thing about this is I was diagnosed relatively young, and since then I've become a sounding board for so many things and traumas that I've experienced since then. I've had 3 other young women be diagnosed with breast cancer and be referred to me, and we started to share stories. I've had other people with losses in their families. A very close friend who lost her husband, and he was only 33 years old. All of them have come to me because they know that I have been the one to experience trauma. I have been the one that has been handling adversity. And that gives me a lot of value and purpose. And them seeing me kind of power through what I've gone through and being able to lean on me helps me thrive, right? It keeps me going. And, you know, I've just found so much value in being that person for others. The last one is I think that I love this. This is uniqueness is your superpower. One of the things that's interesting is when I first was diagnosed and I was actually trying to grow my career while I was going through chemotherapy. And I remember applying for a job and my dad asking me, you know, are you going to tell them about cancer when you apply for this job? And I was just like, well, I mean, it's kind of out there. It's on LinkedIn. It's on the internet. I have a website, there's videos, everyone kind of knows. And, what used to be a liability, I think now is a superpower. And this post on the left is a post that I made on LinkedIn. It's really the first thing that I ever shared broadly about cancer with my professional network. And it got over 2 million views and over 40,000 likes. And so it clearly resonated with people. And my openness was a differentiator, I think, in my career and a differentiator in who I am as a human being. And so I've done a lot of different things, from public speaking to events to sharing my story to videos, etc. And every single time I receive incredible outpouring of support and kindness and sharing of stories. People who want to share something that they've gone through that is similar, or something that their family member has gone through, and us having that community and connecting with one another has been incredibly cathartic for me, and a way to just share with others all that we're going through. The reason why my foundation is called the Willow Foundation is because it is my favorite tree. It is a beautiful tree that brings me calm and peace. And for so many years, I didn't know why that was. Why, when you look at a willow tree, just kind of flopping in the wind, does that seem so interesting and beautiful? And it's because the willow tree is not just beautiful, it is also incredibly resilient. I love this quote. The willow tree is one that will be able to withstand basically anything. And the resilience that tree exhibits is something that I will want to emulate for the rest of my life. I have deeply enjoyed sharing my story across various audiences, but most particularly with you, this group. And I hope you've found some commonalities with my story and are able to take some of those principles and live a life of purpose, value, and resilience. Thank you so much for having me.